Hi, I'm Horace, and as you've probably seen today, the first class that I'm doing is on how to properly study. A lot of people, whenever you see them like either educating or saying you need to do art, or like you need to practice art, is they will preach and say you need to study. But a lot of the times, I almost never see how to properly study. Today I'm going to go ahead and go into that. To go ahead and start off with, let's do something that I'm comfortable with, and I want you to do something that you're comfortable with as well. So, for example, I'm just starting off with a face. I'm going to be drawing a little bit quickly because I've been drawing things like this almost every day. So, if you don't finish up at the same rate that I do, please don't judge yourself or anything like that. Just take your own pace at this. The best way to warm up is to start with something that you're comfortable with, whether it be a face, an animal, a cartoon, something that you have watched recently that you are obsessed with. I want to encourage something that you're comfortable with. And also, as I draw, maybe keep in mind how I am laying things out. I do want to encourage maybe not copying, but like seeing how I do things, seeing my method of things, and incorporating things into your own art style and your own practices as well. One thing I like to teach and preach is that if you like it and if you see something that you feel looks cool, go ahead and try it. It's not going to be perfect the first time. It's not going to be the same. I'd like to say it's not going to be the same as the person that you're inspired from, but just start incorporating it into your style and take inspiration from others. That's how we all do art. And I'm just doing a little portrait over here just as a quick warm up. I had one earlier that I did as well. One thing that I have picked up from a few people is whether or not you feel that you hate this or it doesn't look good or you were uncomfortable with this and you don't like how it turned out. I always like to stress that you keep your sketches, whether or not you like it or not. Because let's say you want to retry this specific drawing. Say I wanted to retry it. I can always say, okay, I'm going to hide it and put it over here. And just because I can't see it and I want to try it, doesn't mean I'm not improving. And I've got it hitting, so I'm not obsessing over, okay, what can I do better? And again, I am still just doing warm-ups. So even just as a warm-up, I can take this, I can move it, and I can see, okay, I did this earlier. And it's not exactly the same, but it is an improvement. It's a little bit more fluid, it's a little bit more flowy, and even though it's a quick little sketch, it's something different. And say, for example, here, if I want to pick it apart, I can say, ooh, okay, I like how I did the eyes a little bit better than how I did this. This may be a little bit more realistic, but this is more lifelike or more expressive. I'm going to give another minute for anybody who is drawing along to kind of wrap up with kind of the comfy bits, not just for anybody in stream, but for anybody watching along as well. One thing I like to kind of start off with is mentioning the kind of brush or kind of utensils that we're going to be using. A lot of people, when they start off drawing my drawing, they're drawing with really small pencils, especially when they're studying. Lots of sketchy lines and really small details. I actually want to discourage from that because it gets you caught up in all the details before you're ready to even go that route. So what I do is I get a bigger brush, and it might be a little bit too big, and I get something that I can generalize with, and that's what you want to start with when you're studying and sketching and learning, is the big and obvious shapes, the area of which that you can see. Some people even encourage, as a first steps, is silhouetting. I'm not going to go over that today. I'm just going to go over things like gesturing and how to, for example, study reference photos. Now I'm going to pull off this one from the side, and I'm not going to quite start with it, but I'm going to get ready and kind of bring myself to be ready for something like this. So, for example, I like how this head is, and I know what orientation this head is facing, and it's a little bit more of a complicated pose, but as I'm looking at this and I see her head, I see that it's facing off to the right a little bit. It's not looking head on or straight on. And again, I've got that big brush, so I'm keeping in mind the bigger shapes. I'm not doing anything super specific or super detailed, and I've got this shape. And I could even stop here for the beginning. And I got a lot of stringy hair over here, so I'm gonna put this in. But I've got this general shape, and I've got an idea of, okay, this is where I want to start. And that's what you want to do with especially more complicated poses, and when you're studying something more challenging, is you want to break it down. Okay, this is where the head is, this is the body. So for example, I'm going to hide that layer again and add another one, and draw on as many layers as you want, or just move to the side. But now I can see the shape that this body is in, and we're just going to do the torso. And it's this weird rectangular / oval shape. It does curve down a little bit, and keeping an eye on the shapes, the movement of the body. And again, keeping in mind no focusing on major details, but you also want to imagine what's going to be behind this head. So we'd already gotten the head kind of figured out, and the head is pretty easy. I'm going to bring down the opacity a bit, and one thing I like to actually encourage is tracing. Definitely not claiming anything as your own, but for a general idea is, okay, I'm gonna trace the shapes of this body. And I'm kind of taking a quick jump ahead, but I've got the legs here. And this is without the head again, because we did the head earlier, and breaking it down into steps. So what I did is I got the shape for the body behind the head, and kind of guesstimating, okay, this is about where this is, creating another shape for the arm. It's more of an oval again, an elongated oval, and then doing the same for the legs. And everybody will preach, okay, you want to break everything down into shapes, and yes, you do, but there's so many different shapes in the body. Okay, I could do a square for the hips, but I also could do 2 circles, and it's really about what you're comfortable with and what works for you. And a lot of the time, yes, that does take experimentation and it takes practice, but it also just sometimes takes jumping into it. And one thing I like to say is expect to be bad. It sounds really negative, but it's the truth, and everybody is going to be bad. But the catch is not getting upset at yourself or demeaning yourself or self-critiquing yourself so heavily to the point that you start depreciating and hating your art. What you want to be aware of, especially when you're studying, is okay, I may be bad at this now, but I'm studying for a reason. I can get better, and I can take the steps that I know I took earlier. So for example, I'm moving back onto the body with away from tracing, and I'm adding these shapes again, and this time on their own. And I'm it's not going to be exact, but I'm adding them kind of in this in the same order, and creating a general shape, general outline. And this is roughly, I missed the shoe. It's another oval right here. So I'm getting the rough shape, the rough area of this gesture. And you can do this with anything. You can do this with any pose. You can do it with just heads, or even expressions. So even though her head is covering up this section, I'm going to fill this in as like a little reminder. So like this section right here that I just circled is an area that's covered by the head, but it's to help me understand, okay, this is how the body is bending, this is how the anatomy works. There's this empty space right there. I'm gonna go ahead and add that other shape for the shoe, and it's just another rectangle. And if we go ahead and get rid of this reference image, you can see, oh, that looks about the same. It's not as scrunched, but you can definitely see that I'm taking reference to this pose. And I'm going to go ahead and bring that opacity back up. And, well, actually, I haven't done the head yet, so let's not skip ahead of that. Let's go ahead and add the head back. Draw the head, and it's touching the leg right here. And I've got this oval here. I can also do my classic circle shape and whatnot. And it's not going to be in the same spot. Well, it might be. But I'm going to bring back my head from earlier, and it's about the same shape. And I had broken it down earlier. And so now what I can do is take the shape that I have over here and bring it into the same area. And sometimes I start with a head, sometimes I start with a body. This one is definitely a bit of an awkward pose, which I did want to try first because it's going to be challenging, especially for me. And I wanted to demonstrate that possibly I might fail and I might struggle. That's one thing I see that happens with a lot of educators and a lot of teachers, that they don't quite show that they fail or that they struggle. And I'm doing okay so far. I'm feeling a little awkward with how this is coming, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start refining it. And that's where the next step comes in, is now we've got all of the basic shapes together. I'm going to go ahead and bring the opacity of this back up. And now I can take these shapes and bring them together. Okay, this arm is got more curves to it now that I can see away from my reference. And oh, this leg comes up a little bit more, and oh, okay. I'm seeing over here this leg overlaps on this arm, so maybe this is why it looks a little wonky. And that's one thing that's amazing about digital art is I can adjust and move things. Take this eraser. There, we've got that shoulder in there, and go ahead and bring this down. And this shoulder blade is coming up, and now what I'm doing is now I'm starting to add the detail without adjusting the size of my brush. And I'm keeping in mind still the shapes, but not obsessing over, okay, this is what shape is supposed to be here, and what is this shape? I took it from the trace and I moved it over to, and translated it, instead of getting overwhelmed, because that's one thing that I see with beginner artists is a lot of beginner artists will get overwhelmed because they see so many different shapes. They see so many different gestures, and it's a lot to start off with, and so it can be overwhelming. And that's kind of where I'm coming in, is I'm breaking that down and I'm saying, okay, this is how we can make this easier. So I've got this hair, and over here I see that this hair is, and the ornaments are blocking some area. So for example, this head over here is covering that area that I mentioned earlier. Now I'm kind of filling in those little gaps and moving forward. It's like taking little steps. You can't get to destination B, or you get to your destination or spot B, without first taking those steps. And everybody sees the art and they see, okay, you're at the destination. They don't see how you got there. And when starting, everybody wants to be at the destination, and it's overwhelming because you don't know how to get there sometimes. Okay, these shoes are a little bit difficult, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and break them down into shapes again. So I've got this rectangle here for the tongue of the shoe. Maybe bring it up a little bit. And everything is shapes, and I'm sure that you've seen this a lot. And I do apologize, I do move around a lot, especially on stream, as I was working on the hair, but I moved from one section because I got a little bit frustrated. And that's okay to do too. Just adding small lines and adjusting the shapes and whatnot. And it's also okay if you see, for example, this crease over here. Or let's go back to the shoe. I see a couple details that I'm drawing a little bit differently, but aren't quite in the shoe itself. Is adding a couple details if it feels more comfortable to you. Is it doesn't have to be perfect, especially if you're just using reference. Is adding a couple things is good. So for example, this sock. Or even subtracting things. I don't want this circle on this sock. Or this ankle looks a little bit hidden, and I don't quite like not having it there. So I'm going to go ahead and add this in here, because to me it makes sense that an ankle would be there. It's using the knowledge that you have of the anatomy. And if something doesn't make sense, break it down. Like I did with that shoe. It's not the same. It's not perfect. It's not that big, bulky shoe that I had. I could make it that. I could beef it back up, but I don't really want to. This is why reference is good, because you can take a little bit of creativity. And tracing is a great tool to learn, but it's not a great tool for being creative, if that makes sense. Yes, you can take something and you can trace it and oh my god, it looks almost like an exact copy, but what you're really not doing is you're not creating something from your imagination. And so what you want to do, especially if you're studying, is take it a step further. You can trace, you can learn by tracing. But you're not creating as well with it. So I'm going back to this hair now that I've taken a short little break. And there's a lot of black, so I'm erasing every once in a while. I've got a shortcut key on my keyboard, that's why I keep switching so quickly. I promise I'm not a wizard. But her hair it's a little bit stringy, so I'm not making it as poofy. But I've got this eraser tool, kind of taking away some of the area as well. Using that as like a secondary way to sketch, because you can fill in lots of blacks and subtract. It's okay to subtract, and so for example I'm taking big areas away. For example, her roots are black. And it's learning how to sketch with things like that. And using different methods, different brushes. I know a lot of artists get excited about large amount of brushes, and I want to encourage that as well, because it's amazing learning different tools that'll help. I personally don't use a lot of brushes. I actually am today kind of forcing myself to use a brush that I'm not used to. Let's see, I've got this sock here. Let's get to the right brush. But forcing myself to use a brush that I'm not used to drawing, so that I'm exercising a little bit more. And that's another thing that's really important to do while you study as well, is doing things that you're not used to, things that are challenging, because the more you do things that are challenging, yes, it's a little bit frustrating, but the more you do those things that are challenging, you're exercising that muscle. It's a weak muscle at first, and you're comfortable. That's why I get you to start when you're comfortable. Or with something that you're comfortable with, because that's where you warm it up, and you're ready to get into something that you're not comfortable with. I'm going to give you a second before I move on. Talking about the face, I have started outlining this nose. A lot of the time I will start with the nose, and then kind of use that as an anchor. For those of you that do struggle with noses, it's as simple as that. Just a triangle with a couple little dots that are curved up like this. I personally use that, but it's a smaller, more simpler version of this nose tutorial. But this is what I'm going to stick with for now. You don't want to get too caught up on details, like I said earlier, but I'm putting that there for anybody who might be curious on how to draw a nose real quick. But I'm going to go ahead and erase these guidelines slightly. Kind of give myself more room to draw. I'm going to go ahead and keep my brush big and chunky like that, even though I'm drawing small little details, because I can always go back when I'm making these almonds. And I've got these guidelines. I've seen a lot of artists say that as you progress, you'll not need guidelines anymore. I think that's bogus. It's okay to need guidelines. And even as an experienced artist, I use guidelines quite a lot. So I'm getting in this shape, and it's a big blob at the moment, but I got these lips over here, and I'm erasing. I'm gonna go ahead and zoom in so I can see what I'm doing, and I've got her over here on the side as well. And it's not perfect. By no means is it perfect. But getting used to using a big brush is going to prepare you for those details, because you're breaking them down, you're simplifying them, and they're not as daunting. You've got a gesture for these big shapes. And that's what I do with a lot of my art, is I've got a big area that's generalized. So for example, this nose, I'm going to use the wrong brush apparently. This nose could be smaller, and I'm refining it now with my big brush. And it's okay to retry a few times. And get the right position. Let's use the right eraser. And I just resized my brush. This is the first time that I've resized my brush, and now I'm getting into these smaller details. And I want to go ahead and go in with this mouth. I've got this shape. It's by no means perfect. And yeah, I did struggle with it a little bit. Let's see. She's got some teeth over here, so I want to bolden these out. And you can see that it looks like a face. It looks almost well done. Well, I don't want to say well done, but almost completely thought out, even though I've got big strokes and messy areas and whatnot. Get these pupils in here. And if anything, even if you're not following along, this can be a kind of a little insight onto how I draw and how my thought process goes along with this. And goes along with drawing. I see that her eyebrows are leaned in instead of outward like that, so I'm going to adjust that. She's got a little bit more thickness to her eyebrows, so I just went ahead and added that. And I don't quite like the eye contact of that one, so I'm going to take that out and readjust it. Again, it's okay to retry. I'm zooming out. And I see that I'm missing a huge section on the hair. And And that's one thing that's really good about zooming in, zooming out. But I also don't want you to get caught up on tunnel vision. I'm looking at this one area specifically. I'm getting real focused on it. You don't want to spend too long on one section, because now, oh, I can see I've got more hair that I can do. And this is how you can break down a big drawing and turn it into a completed piece. And what I'm going to do next on these next drawings is kind of do the same process, only I'm going to speed through it a little bit and kind of show you repetition and kind of consistency. One thing that I was taught, especially in school, was that consistency is what makes habits. Practice is permanent. Practice does not make perfect, it makes permanent. So whatever you practice is what you'll keep. But I'm going back in and getting some of these defining features, kind of adding a couple that I see without seeing them on her specifically. So I see this indent that could be with this muscle, or I see this shading here. I'm taking it slow for this one because it is the first introduction and the first demonstration. And it's not perfect. I don't want you ever to be aiming for perfect, because there's no such thing as perfect. Even professional artists who do professional big gig look like they are perfect, they can still break down their art and say, okay, here's something that I can do to be better. And that's how they improve, is they say, okay, I may have done a good job on this, but why is it good? And that's what I'm about to do here, is I'm almost done with this sketch. And this is one of the biggest points in studying, and one of the most important parts in studying as well, is actually want to write this down. 1, breaking it down. So you've got the shapes. The big brush, small details, or not, a big brush instead of small details. And then step 2, refining. So what can you do to make details smaller? And then final step, which is what we're about to do, is, I'm going to spell this wrong. I may or may not have spelled that correctly, but you can critique it. And this is the step that a lot of people and a lot of artists either do wrong or struggle with, is critiquing. What did I do wrong? That's what a lot of people hear in their head, is what did I do wrong? I don't want you to ever say that to yourself. You didn't do wrong, it's what can I do better next time? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and change to a red. And this is going to show, okay, these are the areas that we need to improve on. So, for example, I'm going to go ahead and put this here. So her eyes, now that I'm coming back at it, her eye shape is not the same. her eye contact is not the same either, even though I adjusted it. I could adjust it. So I'm just going to outline it on the outside. And write a little note. This is where I'm critiquing. So, the hair. Her hair up here is a little more stringy, but also a little bit more curved and curly. And right now, this may look like I may look like I did a really good job comparatively. Actually, I may want to do this on another layer. This may look like I'm sitting here nitpicking, but that's what you're going to do to yourself, is you're going to make small, tiny little increments and improvements. And this is where the important part is in studying, is, okay, what can I do better, even if it's small? And it's those tiny little steps. Okay, she's got some more hair up here that I didn't add, and curls, and more curls over here. And I didn't finish the shoe. More detail to the shoe. And maybe for you, this may look like, so for example, if you did the same sketch, let's move this reference. You did the same sketch and maybe it was something you didn't catch, the arm was off. It was up too high over here, and maybe you can say it needs to move down, and that can be a big step sometimes. Some people will do different steps, and some people will see different things. Maybe you see something that I missed out on that I am not picking up on still. Maybe it's just the fishnets that I could add. But it's taking that last step and not degrading yourself during critique. What can I do better on this shoe? Okay, it needs another layer to it. It's got... it looks like they're a little bit platformy. More depth on that, more detail. And this step specifically is where you improve. What can I do better for next time? And I've said this 6, 7, 8 times now because it's important. She didn't have a nose ring. Or she did have a nose ring and I didn't add it. Or I need more curls. And all of that. I tend to do that all in one tiny little area, and I'm kind of spreading it out at the moment so that you can see how my brain and what is going on in my brain every time that I draw. And sometimes I'll break it down a little bit more if I'm getting frustrated. So for example, if I have a hand that I'm drawing that I'm struggling with really bad, I will break it down into more shapes and more layers, or more steps. So I'm going to go ahead and merge all these. Well, not that one. I want to keep that. I'm going to merge and move all these together so that I can... Oh, whoops. I'm going to group this as well. Good group. So I can move all these together. And I will also have this sheet available, the PSD file, available on my Patreon. So if you do want to see the entire version and all of the reference images that I have as well, if you have Krita, I also will provide the Krita file so that you can have these reference images. I know that Photoshop doesn't have reference image compatibility. I am going to erase these or bring them on another layer because they're not quite relevant to that. Well, actually, this head is. But yes, all of my tutorials are going to be available on my Patreon. Let's go with something. This may not look simplistic or like simpler, but I'm gonna go with something like this. This is, ironically enough, a little bit more simple. It's a bit of a complicated pose, but it's fun. And well, let's not do this in red. I'm going to do exactly what I did over here, these steps, break it down, refine it, and critique it. So I'm breaking it down right now, and I'm not doing it in tracing because I'm a little more comfortable with this, but I'll go ahead and get this into a comfortable size so I'm not too bulky. There's definitely a little too bulky, because if you're drawing with just a black space, it's not really going to be too effective. This might even still be a little bit too bulky, but I'm going to try. Okay, so we've got a head right here, and a body, and that's it. Just this rectangle. They're not too loud. Sorry. So I've got these rectangles and these shapes. I'm bringing them down. And this is a wall. I'm not going to demonstrate it except for up here. So I'm not going to draw these lines and get too much detail in there. I'm going to keep it simple. So got that booty up here. And sometimes in the process I will do the break it down and refining step at the same time. So for example, I'm refining just a tiny bit over here, and it's okay if you do a couple steps at the same time. Just try not to get too caught up on it, because I don't want you to get overwhelmed. And I'm just zooming through this. And by the way, this is just the first portion of this. There is another portion that I will do a little bit, either a little bit later or on another stream, depending on how long this takes. This is just the anatomy part of studying. But one thing that I really love about digital art, kind of segueing or not quite quite segueing, but tangenting. But in digital art, I can go, okay, I like this, and I have another part, so I'm going to copy and paste. It's not perfect, but look at that. They're all simple, and what I can do, now that they're all copy-pasted over, is I can make them their own individual drawings. So if I can merge. Create their own drawings. So they're all wearing hoods. And right now I definitely could downsize, but I'm choosing to take the time to do that first step, breaking it down still. So I'm not so overwhelmed. I could sit here and focus on the details, but right now I know that's going to give me a lot of tunnel vision, and I really don't want to do that to myself. And I do this process every single time I draw. It's just studying it's a little bit more present. Because in a way, drawing is studying, it's just taking it a step further from studying. And it's taking what you know and applying it to a full drawing. So that one actually isn't so far down, it's a little bit more curved on that line. And his shoes are black, so I'm going to go ahead and keep them black. I'm going to go ahead and downsize because I've got these fingers. And technically it is still breaking it down because these fingers are so small and intricate. And I know fingers are hard. I am actually going to, here in a minute, in fact I might do it in the next one, do hands as their own study. Hands are their own battle. Every artist struggles. See here, I didn't do what I did over here, and so now I'm getting a tiny bit little overwhelmed. Not terribly so. I could choose to go back up, but I'm focusing on the folds and of this. And just because I didn't trace doesn't mean I'm a better artist. Just because I didn't do one step or I did two steps at the same time doesn't mean I'm inherently better than other artists. It just means I'm a little bit further in that process. There's some artists that are better at doing animals and drawing animals than I am. There's some artists that are better at drawing cartoons or character design. There's a lot of artists that are better at costume design than I am. I don't do a lot of costume design. I'm getting these folds in these pants. A lot more folds in these jackets. And at this point I'm just adding more detail. This was a fairly simple exercise. But just because I found it easy doesn't mean that someone else might find it easy. It may be difficult for someone else. And I'm also doing a little bit of shading just because that's automatically what happens with this brush. Actually, I want to keep that as something I can critique. And I'm also sitting here, I'm like, oh, I could do these shoes a little bit better. I'm sitting here and critiquing, saying, oh, I could do this better. And sometimes you can do a step a little bit later. So for example, let's say you finish a drawing, you go ahead and go and post it, and then a week later, that's when you critique it. You can do that as well. You can do that to your art, or you can do it to studies. You can come back and take a break, take a step back. That tunnel vision really does get to you sometimes. So I'm going to go ahead and go on and move to the critiquing stage, and I did all of that. And maybe half the time that I did this, because I was explaining all of it. But I did the break it down into shapes with a big brush, and then I was refining it, making it smaller details, being aware of where certain features are, and now I'm going to go ahead and critique it. So I could have spent a lot more time on these shoes, even though I did want to. I chose not to. I spent more time on the shape of the shoes and shape of shoes. But I could have taken a lot more time, and I chose not to, and that's okay. I know what I'm ready for and know what I'm not, and I know what I will get frustrated with. Okay. I could have added more folds, been aware of how things fold. Let's see. I could have, if I really want to be nitpicky, I could have added more perspective. The wall. Finished the wall. It's really all about what you want to focus on in a study. So here I was just studying the anatomy and the pose, which way these were oriented, or the awkwardness of the pose. It's fun, it's kitschy, it's kooky, it's adorable. But it's also a little bit tricky to draw, and that's why I wanted to bring it up. Okay. And I'm not going to do all of these, I'm just getting these to pick from. I'm going to go ahead and see if I pick the right section. Okay, let's see. I'm going to do one of these hands. Now, hands are the trickiest. What I'm going to do on this one is I'm going to go back to... Can I have my reference tool? I'm going to go back to that process again of kind of showing you, okay, breaking it down and doing it with the shapes, because hands are tricky. I'm going to do this one right here. Now, I am keeping my brush fairly small. This is still keeping it with the big shapes and breaking it down. So I'm going to go ahead and trace it. I've got this rectangle and this box. And all these fingers I'm going to keep in the same shape because they're in the same direction. Boom! That's a hand. That doesn't quite look like a hand, but it also does at the same time. Hands are shockingly simple. So I'm going to go ahead and break it down again. Bring it up over here. Kind of this box. Keeping in mind the shapes. And I've got this finger that's up here. And this rectangle. I've also got this triangle over here behind it. I'm keeping in mind my shapes. And it's not exactly the same. It almost never will be with studying. Unless you get really good at copying, which I also want to discourage against, because that just doesn't let you emote and be open with your art and allow for more flow in the art. Okay. Now we've got these shapes again, and the hard part with hands is everybody wants to stop right here. But that's not what you can. That's not what you should do with hands. Let's get the shape in here. That's not what you should do with hands. What you have to do is you have to break it down in multiple sections. Okay, I'm going back in. I'm getting these fingers. Okay, some of them are overlapping. And, oh, these knuckles are over here. Okay, I can bring this back, and breaking it down into multiple sections is good. And maybe it's not perfect. Maybe it's something that doesn't quite look right. You can always try again. And maybe there's a gap right here. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and bring the opacity on this up, and so we can see all the detail. And oh, look at that. That's something I didn't hit when I was tracing. Okay, this finger comes over, and this finger in the middle is blocked. Now I can start getting this detail in. And I'm still adding generalized lines. But now I can be more conscious of where things are, where the folds are. I can see it in that drawing up there, and so I can add it in the same area. And oh, this fold up here. This fold down here. And it may not look exactly the same. You may need a little bit more practice. It's not going to be perfect, but that's what studying is taking it, breaking it down, and oh, I'm not as good at it, so I critique again. I'm going to go ahead and leave this as is so I can go ahead and critique it. I didn't really go too much into the refining stage. I did a little bit with that here, but I'm doing that on purpose. Someone who isn't as experienced with hands, you could add more. You can see that you can add more joints. I'm kind of bringing myself back to that level as I know that I can bend this more. Bend thingy. And where's this detail? Why is this so straight? It's too straight. And okay, make a little bit more sense. There's too much shadows here. Let's refine more. And oh, there's a second layer to this hand over here almost. Maybe make this box a little bit more 3D next time. And you can make little notes that make sense to just you. Maybe they're just little scribbles, but I want you to be able to read it in the future. Sometimes I'll scribble something and it'll say I. So okay, what did I mean? So try and be aware of that. Maybe sometime you'll come back to it, and it'll be a little bit of time, and especially on pieces that you haven't touched in a while because either you got frustrated or you just haven't had the time. Maybe making notes that make sense will help, and I've said that to myself so many times. It's like maybe if I made notes that actually made sense, I'd be able to improve on this a little bit more. And sometimes I don't see what I saw at first. And that's really important because sometimes, yes, you do stare at it and you're staring, oh, I noticed this is something wrong and I'm sitting here and I'm dwelling on it. And you write it down and it's something that I messed up. And I come back, I walk away and I come back and, oh, I don't notice it anymore because I haven't been staring at it for a while. I haven't been thinking about it. But it's also, let's say you make a note and say, oh, okay, it looks good like this, but it could be better. And so I write down, needs more folds. I walk away and I come back and I see this and I'm like, I don't really need more folds in my art style. I was just overthinking that. And sometimes walking away does actually give you that chance to go, oh, damn it, I really was just overthinking that. And that is important, especially with studies. And sometimes I do want to encourage walking away. But, oh, there's another one I could add too. There's more depth and more folds. More fold slash shape. See, that I would be able to walk away from and see, okay, there's more lines that I could add here. I don't see them here because of the light, but I could add more creases right there. And sometimes I'll add a little bit of a line that go, okay, cool. This is where this cuts off. Just keeping in mind some of the shapes of the hand and where it folds, what areas you can focus on next time, and how you can improve in the future. And with that, that actually brings this section to a close. Again, I want to stress the 3 rules, which are, number 1, break it down into shapes. Use a bigger brush so that you're not sitting there trying to create details before you're ready. And number 2 is then you can start refining. So once you've got that big shape in there and your understanding of the area and how the figure itself is shaped, that's when you can start defining features and making details even smaller. And then, of course, step number 3, which is the most important step, is critique. And I need you to be aware, and I've stressed this entire video, but I need you to be aware of just because you didn't do what you think is good enough doesn't mean you can't do better next time. So saying, okay, what can I do and what can I improve on next time? This certain part of this section is not as good as I want it to, so I can focus and improve in the future. And I can improve on this thing and this thing, kind of breaking it down, and instead of demeaning and talking down about yourself, saying, oh, this is what I can do better, this is what I can improve on, so it's not so daunting. But with that, I would like to say thank you for watching, either if you were in on stream or if you're watching the YouTube video or the VOD afterwards. The VOD will most likely be cut down a little bit, so in the future, I would definitely suggest joining in on streams and whatnot. They're usually either on Discord or on YouTube. But I do also have a Patreon, which will be linked in the description, if you would like to catch not only early updates, but exclusive tutorials and redlining sessions, which means you can come to me, you can ask, hey, I need some help with this. Can you redline it for me? And when I have the chance or during stream, I will gladly redline for you, especially if you're part of the Patreon. But of course, please keep an eye out for any future videos. I will be making and posting more videos on YouTube for you guys, mostly tutorials and whatnot, but I'll also post repeat paints, so keep an eye out for all of those. And again, thank you so much for watching.